Hello and welcome. This is Michael William Denny of the ThunderWizard.com YouTube channel. I wanted to talk to you in depth about the power of the feminine, the power of the Mother Goddess. And I wanted to talk about how extremely important it is for us to be able to reawaken this power and bring it back not only into our lives but into our society. For those of you who are my Thunder Wizard Shamanism students, you need to know how important this power is. So I'm going to be talking to you about the ancient understanding, and I mean the ancient, going all the way back to the first modern humans that came into Northern Europe. And as it so happens, there's a really amazing story about this, which, you know, maybe some of you already know, but if not, I'm going to be sharing it with you. So let's just go ahead and get started with that. Before I launch too deeply into anything, I first need to let you know about some resources that will be helpful for you in understanding what we're going to be talking about. The first one is, if you haven't already, I strongly suggest getting Celestial Chi-Gong DVD. And in that first DVD, I teach what is called the yin-yang hands. Yin-yang just means female, male hands, the interplay of the masculine and the feminine. And this is very important. It's, you know, it's one thing to talk about it, you know, and we Westerners, we do a lot of talking about spirituality and things. But it's important that we actually feel it. Our ancestors, you know, this is the reason why they did ritual. This is the reason why they did cave paintings, and we're going to look at those. The reason why, you know, dance and, you know, all of that stuff. We did all of those things with our bodies so that we could physically connect with the powers. Because remember, before we had this really highly evolved speech and writing, we just had our bodies, and we connected with our bodies and with our emotions. And all the stuff we do now came much later. But, you know, modern people tend to just focus on their intellect, which again has to do with disconnecting with the power of the feminine, disconnecting with the power of the body, the power of our emotions. This is part of that. So if you haven't already, I want you to get Celestial Chi-Gong. And before we're done today, I'm going to give you the basics of an energy exercise which will balance out the masculine and the feminine. But if you haven't already, this is what the DVD looks like. Okay, so I'm also going to share with you another book that you may not know about that I've written, which is called How to Keep a Man. Now, that book I wrote because this was, how long ago was this? A couple years ago? And I was looking to find ways to get more income, and I thought I would kind of make a foray into the self-help book arena. So this was kind of a departure from my normal books. And although I'm very proud of it, it never really took off. However, the people who have read it have told me that it has been very enlightening. My current partner thinks it is the greatest book she's ever read. In fact, she told me that it was extremely helpful for her in learning how to raise her two 10-year-old male twin boys. And so anyway, that book looks like this. It's called How to Keep a Man. And I wrote that book because, you know, at that time I was single, and I had been, you know, fairly newly divorced. I'd been divorced for a couple of years, something like that. And so I was doing the dating thing, and I was running into all of the misconceptions that, you know, and of course I do for a living, I do rune readings and relationship counseling. And so I talk with a lot of women who want to talk about men. And I found that not only through my 53 years of living on this planet, but also with counseling, I found that there's a huge misunderstanding. The men and women do not understand each other. And I wrote that book because, if you pick up your basic self-help relationship book off the shelf and you try and understand, how to communicate, what we're doing now is we're basically just emasculating the masculine. And that is because we've spent the last 2,000 years disempowering the feminine. And so we're kind of at a loss. And so what we're doing now is, in an attempt to even things out between the sexes, we're now, instead of empowering the feminine, we are oftentimes just simply emasculating the masculine. So that's why I wrote that book, to help women understand how men really think. We think very differently from women. Of course, I'm talking generally. Everybody is different. We're talking about generalizations right now. Anyway, so let's get into what this talk is going to be about today. I've done a little introduction. Let's see if we've got any people that have shown up here that may want to share. Let me take a look. Okay. We got 4 people watching. I don't see anybody that's logged in or said anything. Okay. So, feel free. Hopefully I've made chat available. Let me just double check to make sure that chat is available on this. Have I made chat available? Well, in any case, I'm having a hard time seeing that. I do see there are 4 people watching. So anyway, let's just go ahead and continue. So I'm going to get started with the teaching here. And what I first want to do is, let's see, where should we start? Let's start with the Chauvet Cave paintings. If you're not familiar with this, I'll spell it out for you. This is a cave in southern France that has, I believe it has, the oldest art in the world. In the world! These are cave paintings that were, I believe they're at least 25,000 years old. They may be something like 35,000 years old. And it gives us a window into the mindset of our ancient ancestors. And that is spelled C-H-A-U-V-E-T, if you ever want to study it on your own. It's extremely valuable. You saw in the beginning I had the picture of the Venus of Willendorf, which is also about that same age. It's a little newer, a little younger than the cave paintings of Chauvet by a few thousand years, but it's about that same time. So let's take a look at that. And I guess we'll talk starting with that. Let's take a look at that. Very famous, right? Very famous museum piece. It was found when an excavation at a paleolithic site in, I believe, in Austria, Willendorf, Austria, not too long ago. And they found this. Now, this is one of many, quote, Venus figurines that are found all over Europe around the same time in the Paleolithic. And so you can see when you look at it, and I'll put it up here again in a second, you can see that the individual is not here. That we're dealing purely with the power of the feminine. I mean, it's very exaggerated, very exaggerated, very, very large breasts, very large stomach. The pubic area is very exaggerated. There's no feet on it. There's no arms. There's no face. So this is purely focusing on the power the regenerative power of fertility. And for those of us following the ancient northern perspective, we can see this is like a giant. A giant meaning, the giants are the forces of nature, the forces of physics, time, old age, gravity, these kinds of things are these giants. So you see that in this. We're not dealing with a person, we're dealing with a force, a huge force of nature that clearly these people worshipped and understood and depended upon. So once again, look at it again, you'll notice that there's very little individuality, and what's being highlighted is the power, the pure power of the mother, the pure power of fertility, the pure power of the feminine. So now hold on to that, because that's going to be very important. You'll see why as I talk about the Chauvet Cave paintings. And I'm choosing this for a very important reason, because what I'm going to do in this discussion is I am going to share with you the misunderstandings about the power of the feminine. And by the way, for those of you who aren't following the Patreon master classes, we talked very specifically about this power in the class I just put up yesterday. And specifically, we looked at how the male and the female, the power of the feminine and the masculine, work in the thunder wheel, which is, let me show you that again if you're not familiar with it. So that thunder wheel is an 8-spoked sun wheel, which is what we use in thunder shamanism. And it's basically like the combination lock to the entire universe. And we've talked about the 5 elements, we've talked about the 9 worlds, we've talked about all the different ways that this is a combination lock for reality, how energy flows through it. And what I talked about yesterday was how that is broken up with the yin and the yang. And I don't have time to go into that. You can go and get that class on the Patreon page if you'd like, which I gave you already the link, but I'll give it to you again here. So if you haven't already, pay attention to this link, write it down if you need to, and go check that out. So what I want to share on this channel today is I want to share just some general things, because this is incredibly important. Okay, so let's get started on the cave first, the Chauvet Cave paintings. I have a lot to say about this subject, but let's take a look at that first. So now, if you're not familiar with it, this cave, by the way, has been blocked up for the past 25,000 years. So assuming that it was started being used around 30,000 years ago, it was probably used even thousands of years before that. But then they turned it, the people there turned it into a focal center. And it is believed that this was a focal center for in the whole region of Europe, and that Paleolithic people from all over Europe would come to this place to worship. Now, this cave is centered at the base of a valley underneath, I believe, some mountains, and there's a river that flows down from the mountains and out into the plains there. And you're going to see why this became a place of worship. So imagine Paleolithic times, right? We're talking 35,000 years ago. We're talking in the midst of the ice ages. So the world was very different. It didn't look like Europe does now. It looked very different. So you had probably very thick forests. You had all different kinds of animals. You had rhinoceros, you had cave lions, you had cave bears, you had wild horses. You had giant elk that had a span, their horns were 10 feet wide. They were incredibly, just these, imagine this, these herds of these huge animals, all different kinds of animals, which is, by the way, what brought the first humans there. The history of how people got there was around 50,000 years ago. There was a huge climatic shift that was brief that changed the Sahara Desert in northern Africa into grassy plains. And that opened up northern Africa to human beings. The first modern humans were stuck down in southern Africa. And then this climate shift gave them an opportunity, and they followed the herds of game through what used to be the Sahara Desert. They made their way up into northern Africa, and they followed them, and they went all the way up into the northern hemisphere, and they spread all over the globe. And so the ancestors, to those of us who follow the northern tradition, the ancestors of the Indo-European people, these are the people who showed up there following these herds of game. And the Indo-European language, the language that I'm speaking, that you're listening to, of course, it was very different, but it is descended directly from that same tongue that was brought with the first people who came, the first modern human beings who came out of Africa into Europe. And 35,000 years ago, these people showed up into northern Europe, and then we had ice ages for 40,000 years. So again, taking us back 30,000 years, these people may have looked very different. They were my ethnic ancestors. These were the ancestors of all European people. And so we can trace my ancestry, and if you're of Northern European ancestry, all the way back to these people. But they probably did not look like I do, because I have light skin and light eyes, because my ancestors lived in that Paleolithic Ice Age conditions for 40,000 years, 40,000 years. That's why our skin changed, so that we needed to get more sunlight in order to survive, being bundled up in caves, for 9 months out of the year probably. So bear that in mind. This is the world that all of this is happening. So again, put into mind you're at the base of this valley, at the foot of the mountains, covered in forest, and there's this rushing river coming out of this canyon, and then there's this cave. And I'm not even going to tell you what it looks like, but imagine the mouth of this cave right at the mouth of this river. This is what our ancestors, imagine the first person walking up, to this area, and he sees this. So imagine, again, you've got all this forest and this river and herds of game running around, and you follow the river up to the mouth of this cave. And I don't have to tell you what it looks like. Imagine there's big giant forest around the top of that cave, right? So you can see there's the pubic hair, and it's the womb of the earth. That's important to understand, because there's a lot of questions as to why our ancestors decided to make all of these cave paintings in this particular cave. Of course, there are other caves that they painted in, but this is among the oldest. And so it wasn't like they were just going up and graffitiing the place. That's not what was happening. There was a very specific purpose, and I'm going to share with you what that is. So let's take a look inside the cave a little bit. So as you walk in, as you saw from the beginning, there's animals that have been drawn on the mouth of the cave. But now again, in order to truly get the most out of it, you have to put yourself back in that period of time. So they didn't have flashlights, they didn't have lights, they had fire. And so I'm sure that the first worshipers would go into that cave and they would light a fire. Now, Anybody who's camped and you've had campfires, or you've had a fire next to a rock wall, you know what I'm about to share with you. The way that the flames flicker around bounces off the walls start to move. So for our ancestors inside that cave, the cave would have been moving and breathing. It would have been alive. And what they saw is, as you know, there's stalactites that are there and protrusions coming out. There's all kinds of things coming out of the walls of this cave. And so imagine them sitting there, and I imagine them chanting. When I've done work going back and journeying, of course I can't prove this, but when I go back and journey down there, I've heard chanting. The Hool breath, by the way, which I teach, that meditation came from tapping into these people. And that was where I was given that. And so I believe very strongly that they would have gone in, they would have lit a fire, and they would have chanted. They would have chanted to the mother. And they would have seen, as the flames are flickering on the sides of the walls of the cave, that the cave was coming alive. And what it came alive with was the animals that they saw on the plain. So I'm going to show you some pictures of these cave paintings. Bear in mind that now it's taken with a modern flash, and so it's totally different. It looks washed out and it looks very two-dimensional, but it's not. They are painting on the sides of the cave where the protrusions are coming out, and they're seeing the animals in the sides of the cave. So let me just share those with you. Okay, I can't really do it justice, so I do recommend, if you need to, pause and go and look at all of these cave paintings so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. There's some more that I'm going to share with you, but I'm waiting because it's very important. I have a very important revelation to share with you about what our ancestors were doing. Now, as a result of my journeys back to that time and also my studies in this, I've come to the conclusion that our ancestors 35,000 years ago did not see themselves the way we see ourselves today. Because think about it. What would a modern person have done if they found a cave like that? And if they were to go in there, even if they weren't going into just graffiti, what would they do? They would paint pictures of humans. Now, you do see this in a lot of caves where you will see pictures of human beings alongside these animals. And this represents a shift in the thinking. And that is when we started moving away from the purely feminine and moving towards the masculine. And that's what we culminated in these past 2,000 years. We culminated in a purely masculine outlook, which is, it's an extreme. We lack the balance of the feminine. And that's when we start seeing ourselves as these things that conquer and create and build. But our ancestors 35,000 years ago didn't see themselves as human beings like we do. They saw themselves, get ready for this, they saw themselves as spirit beings. How do I know that? Well, one of the reasons is that was the feeling I got when I went back and I journeyed into it. When I look at those cave paintings, you don't see any human beings. In this cave, there are no human beings. The closest you get to a human being is this. You'll see some, this is just one example, and there's multiple ones of this, but you see this all over the cave. This is important. The people who are in there, we don't know if that is a man or a woman. It's probably a man, because I don't know this for a fact, but you know how we do have evidence to believe that the idea was that men were priests and that women were shamans. So it would have been the realm of the priest to do things like painting and that kind of thing. No, I don't know that for a fact. I'm just assuming that. But whoever that was, that they put their handprint on there. Now, modern people look at that, and this is what sparked me. There's a really powerful documentary. I can't remember the name of it. It's Werner Herzog did it, about these caves. If you look it up, you can find it. And he asked the question, the typical question, why did they do this? And some guy, I don't know who he was, why he had, I don't know, why we care about his opinion, I don't know. But he said the very typical modern thing. He said, well, you know, human beings have to put their mark on everything, and they had to say that I did this. And I thought about that, and it just didn't feel right. It felt like a typical knee-jerk modern reaction, and it's a projection, because that's how we do things now. Human beings want to take credit for things nowadays. But we can't get into the mind of our ancestors and assume that's why they did it. They were just bored and they wanted to you know, basically graffiti the place, and then, you know, this is my signature, I'm going to put my handprint on there. You know, I mean, if they had the ability to create these beautiful pictures of animals, they would have put a picture of themselves up there. They didn't do that. Other caves, they do that later on in time, but in this one they didn't. The reason why the hand is important is because the 5 fingers, this is something you learn. This is why mudras are so important. You know, one of the things that drives me crazy when I see, you know, advertisements and they want to make it look spiritual, and they have somebody sitting in a really crappy, you know, half lotus, and they have them sort of have their hands like this, you know, like that's supposed to look like you're meditating. And you can tell the person doesn't know what a mudra is, right? Which finger are you touching? Are you touching this one? Are you touching this one? You know, those who know, when you do a mudra, you have to extend the fingers. If you're not extending the fingers, you're holding them in. Are you touching the fingers? Are you, you know, these are all very important. The points on the fingers are extremely important. By the way, while I'm on the subject, I've got so many videos on my channel, and I have ones about mudras, and almost nobody is watching these videos. These are priceless. I would have in the past charged hundreds of dollars just to show you any one of these specific mudras. So, you know, I've got whole classes on rune shamanism, 3 hours worth of rune shamanism stuff that used to be a DVD because people wanted to see it. It's got something like 70 views. It's ridiculous. Take advantage of the videos on my channel. I'm telling you. Put some effort into it. It'll be worth it. You guys begged me to put this stuff out there for free. I'm doing it. Take advantage of it or I'll take it off. What's the point? Okay? Anyway. The reason why the hand is so important is because each one of the fingers represents a different part of the brain. Each side has to do with a different part of the brain. This person, that looks like their right hand. It means that that's the left side of the brain. So all of these things are important. The hand is the closest, is what's most important about human beings, because human beings are the only animals that have really specific powers with their opposable thumb. You know, apes do have opposable thumbs, but get them to try and write something or draw, they can't do it. They don't have the coordination. Only human beings have the ability to use that thumb and these 5 fingers, which are the 5 elements in the parts of the brain. So what that person was saying was that as a human, he or she identified themselves with the power of the mind. And if you remember, the ancient Germanic word for human being was man. And man is the same word for moon and mind. At one point in time, there was one word for moon, human, and mind. They're all the same word. And this is what this person is saying, that he or she was man. They were mind traveling around the world. They didn't see themselves as human beings. They saw themselves as spiritual beings of awareness traveling on this beautiful planet Earth. And that's important because, again, there is no depiction of human beings in this cave except for one, and that is not even a human being. It's, now I'm going to get to you why this is so important. It is a Venus, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And before I do, let me explain to you what this cave is. Enormous, by the way. And there are multiple, you go in and then it opens up into another room, and you go in and it opens up into another room, and you get deeper and deeper into this cave. At the furthest reaches of the cave, at the very back, there is a stalactite which has a painting on it, which has a Venus painting. It's of the mother, where it's not a person. In fact, you don't even see anything. You only see the lower part of the the womb. And why is that? Why did they put that at the back of the cave? I'll explain that to you in a second. Let's take a look at that. Here's that photo. Now, as time went on, they drew a couple of other animals that interspersed with the Venus, and I'll explain to you why that is, because that's actually the yin and the yang, the convergence of the male and the female. As time was going on, they were getting more sophisticated in their understanding of the combination of the male and female. They were moving from just the feminine to a balance of the male and female, and then, of course, 40,000 years later, we ended up with all masculine. But anyway, back to this. So here's that cave painting at the very back of the cave, which has the Venus, the mother goddess. Okay, so you saw it towards the right there. You could see it. You could see the pubic area and the legs. Now, originally it was just that, and then later they put in the other two animals. And I'll get to that in a second, because first we need to understand again, what was the point of this cave? And why are there no depictions of human beings in there? So again, remember, this cave is in the side of a mountain at the base of a valley at the mouth of a stream. This is what you see. You follow that all the way through all the different chambers, and you get to the chamber at the back, and you have the depiction of the mother goddess. But it's not, again, it's not a human. Look at it again. This isn't somebody drawing a human being. This is somebody simply identifying the power of the mother goddess, fertility. Right up there in the lower right there. So here's what our ancestors were doing. They go into that cave. They know by looking at it that that is the womb of the earth. They must have seen that as the womb of the entire earth. And that's why it became such a holy place. They go in there, they light their fire, they chant. Maybe they're doing this for hundreds of years, who knows what. And they're seeing on the sides of this cave, the animals start to come out of the walls. And they realize this is the womb of the earth, where the mother goddess has created and given birth to all of the animals that are on this plane. And again, it's a very different time. There were herds of horses and rhinoceros. There were elephants. There were lions. There were bears. There were the first oxen, the first cows. These giant bison that later became cows. There's just so much life out there, and big giant rushing rivers and huge forests, and so you can imagine it is just so full of life. Especially if they have a memory that they came from a place that had once been a desert. If they have that in their memory, if they're telling this thousands of years later, and they end up finding this place, they must have realized this was the womb of all creation. And so what they did was, when they were painting on the sides of the cave, which they weren't saying, what am I going to paint here? They're seeing, what is in this? And they see the head of a lion, and so they trace it out with the ash. They see they see a bear over here. They see an elephant over here. They see herds of horses, and they draw them all in there. Now, this is unlike many other Stone Age caves where you can see the notches in the cave where the hunters are ritually taking their spear and they're throwing it at the cave, because this was a ritual for them to get, to be able to go and intend, getting game, hunting. There's none of that here. There's no hunting involved. I'm sure that there's a very good possibility that they did hunt, but they didn't do that in this cave. This was not about that. This was about creation. And so the reason why they were painting the cave walls was because they saw themselves as protectors of the planet Earth. They did not see themselves as human beings. They saw themselves as Man, 5 fingers. They saw themselves as mind. They saw themselves as spirits. And this ritual of going into this cave and using the power of fire, which is what? The insemination inside the cave. Using this power of insemination to create and to preserve. Now, what is extremely interesting to me is that right around the time that we made a big shift, we go through yugas, which are periods of 25,000 years. And each time we go through these yugas, our awareness shifts and changes. At the time that this was happening, 30, 40,000 years ago, human beings were much closer to their spiritual awareness. The idea is that our planet, our solar system, our galaxy is orbiting around a universal center. And that universal center is where the essence of the consciousness of the universe is. And when we're close to it, we're at the golden age. And when we pass around way back here, we're at the age of darkness. We've just come out of the age of darkness and we're heading back towards the center of the universe again, which is why people are starting to wake up, and which is why there's such a battle right now. You only have, Democrats and Republicans now. There's no middle ground. It's because we're making a shift, and so the old ways of thinking are trying to stay connected. By the way, there's going to be a big revelation about something big, and the way I know that is because we're going into this eclipse. This eclipse is going to reveal something huge. So just remember I said that. So these people 30,000 years ago were much closer to the center of the universe. That's why they didn't need technology like we do. They didn't need technology because there are yogis alive today who have the ability to go sit out in the snow, and they are able to create so much heat in their bodies that the snow will melt around them. That was one of the things that Taoists had the same powers as well. To be a master meant that you could survive anything, any kind of weather scenario, any kind of temperature fluctuation. So these people had far more tools than we realize. They just didn't need technology like we do. And so as a result, they saw themselves as the protectors of the planet. And that meant they were, again, much closer to the goddess, the power of the feminine. So I can start launching into some other things, but before I do, I want to see if there's any questions here that I may not have looked at. So again, if I get to your question, it's because it's inspiring me. If I don't take it personally. It just means that either I don't know the answer, or I don't, for whatever reason, have anything of value to say. So I don't want to waste your time with an answer that doesn't mean anything. And don't give up. If you feel you need to ask me, keep asking me. So Aliyah Wallet, this is comforting. This is beautiful. Renee says, thank you. That's so true. I don't know what I said, but whatever it was true. What goddess you want to meet in person? Your videos has enlightened me and helped me see the bigger picture. What goddess do I want to meet in person? I already met her. There are goddesses that walk among us, and I've met her in person, in the flesh. Keep your eyes open. If you keep meditating, she will manifest in physical form. Is it appropriate to call Freya by Frajapati? It's not inappropriate. You're mixing two different pronunciations of Indo-European words. Prajapati is, if you're, I don't know what it would be in the Germanic, Freya Pater or something like that. Freya, it doesn't work the same. It's not quite the same. I would just stick with Prajapati. What are my thoughts on shamanic power during a woman's moon time? My thoughts are I'm not qualified to answer that question. But I can tell you once when I was worshiping Kali. I was worshiping Kali, and I found myself talking to somebody, and out of nowhere, I started unloading about how important it was, the sacrifice that women made during their menses, that they were giving up their life blood, that this was blood that was meant for creating a human, and how sad it was. And I just went on and on and on, and it wasn't me talking. Afterwards, I was like, where did that come from? So my thoughts are that it's, the goddess knows better than I do, but I at least had a hint about it. Ancient peoples and other cultures, the women go off during their time of the month to meditate. And if you hear the men talk about it, they say, oh, I don't want you cursing my spear or whatever, don't come back. But another way to look at it is that this is a time that only women and the earth can understand. That time of sacrifice. Because women sacrifice a lot. The power of the feminine sacrifices in ways that we men can't understand. And I am acknowledging that I can't fully understand it. I glanced at it, I felt it for a second, but, I would say my thoughts on that are there's a secret in there that I will never understand. And I think the beginning of that would be to treat it as a time of sacredness and power, and use it, not as a time of, oh, here's my time of the month, but it's my time of the month, and you can use that. Anyway, again, I'm talking about something I know very little of. Aaliyah says, in my culture, Ojibwe, that's our most strongest time. So that would be our most strongest time for rituals, which is kind of what I just said. My experience, I just hate it. It's the most uncomfortable time. Okay, so that's all I can see here. I don't know if there's any more things that have been said. So I'll continue. I'll continue with the discussion. So we're about 45 minutes into it, so I'd like to go for at least an hour. All right, so now now that I've talked about this and how important it is, it's interesting. I was just talking about Kali, and it made me very emotional. It gave me a lot of Very emotional. Now, let me share with you something I learned, which is why I feel so strongly about this. For those of you who know, maybe you don't, one of my first forays into true shamanic power, which for me has to do with techniques, technologies, and teachings that go back into prehistory. Teachings that have an unbroken connection into prehistory. There's a lot of modern things which are wonderful and beautiful, but they have been made up in modern times, and a lot of times people are just trying to piece things together. It's not coming from, generations of power. And so I saw this firsthand. I started training in Taoist martial arts, and this was a martial art, an internal martial art, which by the way has to do with energy. And this was a religious, by the way, Taoism is not reading the Tao Te Ching and talking about, that's Taoist philosophy. Taoist philosophy came out of the Taoist religion. The Taoist religion is a very serious thing where they worship multiple gods and goddesses, and they do all kinds of rituals, and they're descended directly from the ancient shamans of China. And so I started learning the spirit fighting, which was, they were teaching me how to use energy to physically fight negative entities. And the idea behind that is that to fight a negative entity, you need 1,000 times more energy than you would if you were to fight a human, which, as it turns out, I'm not allowed to use my martial skills on a human being. I had to make a vow that I would never do that. And the few times that, MMA guys have wanted to test me, and I just show them a little bit of it, you see the fear in their face. They've never seen or experienced anything like it. Part of the reason for that is because the power of the feminine. That when you truly understand the power of the feminine, that is where true power is. This is why, in the Hindu tradition, all of the most powerful gods, the most powerful warrior gods, are goddesses. And let me share with you a picture. Now we can start talking about some of the misunderstandings about the masculine and the feminine. And we're going to take a look here at a picture of, I'm going to go ahead and call her Kali, but I think it's Tara. Kali and Tara in the Hindu tradition, not the Buddhist Tara, but the Hindu Tara, are very similar. And sometimes people get the two mixed up because at first glance they look exactly the same. But I'm going to show you a picture of her and we're going to talk about it. But first look at it. Look at, even this picture is toned way down. I purposely found one that was toned way down. But in her true sense, she's very ferocious and very frightening. She's got a necklace of severed head. She's got a severed head in one hand. She's got a bloody sword in one of her hands. So this is a very frightening. This is a very user-friendly version of a very frightening goddess. So take a look at her. She's standing on top of Shiva, and we'll talk about what this interaction is. So at first glance, what that looks like is it looks like she's dominating Shiva. It looks like she is this is why Westerners mistakenly call her the goddess of death. She's the furthest thing from it. This is the mother goddess in all of her glory. The severed heads are human frailties that keep us from reality, that keep us from our happiness, that keep us in misery, that keep us trapped. And she is chopping the heads off of these demons, which are human frailties. Her tongue is hanging out of her mouth, and blood is coming out of her mouth because she's just been devouring and drinking the blood of these demons. There's a demon called Rakta Bija, and Rakta Bija has to do with when we are trying to perfect ourselves, whatever it is whatever our thing is, whether it's alcohol or drugs or self-hatred or pride or whatever your issue is that keeps you from your soul. whenever we try and fight it, you know, it's like putting your thumb on mercury. You know, when if you've ever spilled mercury on a table, you try and put your finger on it, it just bounces around. You can never, you know, it's like whack-a-mole. You hit it here, it bounces up over here. And Rakta Bija was a demon that, you know, when Kali is out there and she's destroying all of these demons, then one comes up called the Rakta Bija. So she comes at him and, you know, she wounds him and he bleeds. And every drop of his blood creates another clone of him. So you can't fight him. Every time you try and fight him, you know, he just turns from 1 into 1,000, 100,000. So before you're overwhelmed, which is what happens when we try to come against our own insecurities and our own sins, as you will, whatever that is. And so she, Kali specifically, was an emanation of the goddess to fight, the most fearsome emanation of the goddess to fight Rakta Bija. And so she is devouring his blood. Because if it's the drops of blood that turns into the demon, she's gonna devour it. That's why the blood is dripping out of her mouth. And so this is not a goddess of death. This is a goddess of love. So, you know, all of these, you can see all these connections. Somebody had asked me about, you know, the woman's time of the month. I mean, you will understand far more than I can what the connection of that is. And, you know, I shared about this in the Patreon class, but, you know, whenever we hear about grizzly bears mauling and killing hikers, the majority of the time it's a mother grizzly bear, and some hiker unknowingly walked between the mother and her cubs. And so, you know, any mothers out there will know that there is, and I'm getting very emotional as I speak about it, there is nothing more fierce than a mother protecting her children. Nothing. And so I learned in this Taoist art, I learned how to use the power of the feminine in my hands to fight. And I found that there was nothing that could, I mean, and it took so much effort. I can't tell you how long it took me to tap into the feminine within me and go against all of the testosterone in my 28-year-old brain that was telling me to focus on my strength and my power and my muscles. And and this is why I have such respect for the power of women, because I had to completely go against a lot of my masculine nature to learn how to do it, and that's not easy to do. There's a lot of pride connected to that. It's very painful, and I had to really go into a frightening place to tap into that. But once I did, and I was able to manifest that, you know, in this is the great thing about, you know, Chinese martial arts, the internal martial arts. If you're dealing with energy, you can't talk about it. You have to prove it. You have to be able to expend it out of your hands and know what you're doing. You have to be able to know how to use wood, metal, fire, water, earth. You have to know how to use the masculine and the feminine. You have to know how to use them together. And the combination of those two things together, this is why when MMA guys, one guy in particular I know, he actually still to this day goes around and trains MMA fighters to go into the UFC. You know, the UFC champions go to this guy. And this guy's scared to death of me because he wanted to test himself against me once, and I used some feminine power on him, and he said, I never want to feel that again. Scared the life out of him, and I just barely touched him. This is the power that women have. And this is the power that has been suppressed for 2,000 years. And I have to say that, and again, I'm getting emotional here, I have to say that I have such respect for the humility of the feminine, because I think you guys know that if you wanted to, you could destroy us men. I think you know that. And because you love us and you are nurturers and you are bridge builders, you allowed men to act like they dominated the world. And that's important for you to understand. If you are a woman and you feel as though men have disempowered you and have controlled you and have kept you down, you need to understand that that has been your choice to allow that to happen. That I'm not trying to minimize anybody's difficulty or pain. I'm just saying I have felt the power of the feminine. And I know the power that you have. And the first step is to acknowledge that you have that power. And you don't have to pretend you don't just so that men will accept you or that society will accept you. And we live in a male-dominated society. And I think women also know that if they were to release their power, it would be so destructive that it could destroy men. And this goes back to, why is it in fairy tales the villain of the fairy tale is a wicked witch? It's always a woman. It's also true in Chinese films and Chinese philosophy and in Chinese mythology. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Who is the villain? A woman. And that the villains, the wicked witches in those stories, they say two things. One is our ancestors knew that women had all the power. And two, it says that when men, or the power of the masculine, does not do its job, then the power of the feminine, when it reaches full capacity without the power of the masculine, becomes destructive. And that's simply because there isn't a balance of the two. And in the other class, I talk in great detail about the role of the masculine versus the feminine, and how the masculine is there to give direction, and the feminine is there to give power. And that's a much longer subject, which is a whole other class. I don't want to take up your time talking about it. But my goal here is just to simply awaken the power of the feminine. And I wish I could put into words the feelings I have. And as a shaman, as a master shaman and a sorcerer, I have seen and experienced that power. And I can tell you that I can see that the majority of women don't remember their power. And so we need to ask the mother to come back and reveal that to us again, to give us that power. So let me get off my soapbox here and let me see if there's been any questions. Okay. Why do some men hate women? Yeah, it's two good questions there. Why do some men hate women? The short answer is they hate women because they know that you are more powerful than they are, and they resent it and they fear it. Now, I don't know who these men are, and I don't know what their mothers did to them. I know there are here's the thing about when we harm each other. If, let's say, it starts with the masculine seeking to dominate the feminine and take their power away, you're going to create generations of women who are sad and angry, and that feminine is going to seek to assert itself. And so if they have a son and they have got issues with the man that was harmful to them, they're going to put that into their son, and their son is going to respond, I guess, one of two extreme ways. One is to be completely emasculated, and the other one is to try and assert their masculinity by dominating women. Who knows? Maybe they learned it from their father. But, why some individual men, I don't know. Men in general are just simply afraid of your power. I talked a lot about this. I talked a lot about this in the class before that. You know, again, looking at that picture of Kali and Shiva, why is Shiva just lying there? Why is he allowing Kali to stand on him and drip blood all over him? Why is he allowing that? You know, a man could look at that and say, I'm never going to let that happen. It's because he is actually inviting her to do her dance. What empowers women is when men, their strength, their immovability, which has to do with their essence. When a man is firm in his essence of who he is, his integrity, his word, and that his words follow his actions, when a man is connected to that, a woman feels empowered to do the dance of creation. I was just talking with my partner today, and she was telling me this. She was telling me that that's what I did for her. I didn't ask her. She was just volunteered that information. And part of that came from me. You know, she's going through some pretty severe challenges, and that came from me not saying anything. I didn't come here to fix her. I didn't tell her what to do. I just listened. And just that, just the stability of me being there, and as she puts it, having her back, which all that means is I just listen and I love her no matter what's going on. That in and of itself gives her the power to feel like she can create. She can be herself. And men, if men could understand that, and I talk about this again, I've never, you know, I know there are a lot of ball-busting women out there. You know, I know there are a lot of gold diggers out there who try to, I know a lot of men who, you know, I've made a mistake. I married one woman that, you know, I didn't get along with really well, and we weren't aligned, and I felt very disempowered after that. But for the most part, throughout my life, women have wanted to give to me. So for men out there listening, if you run into this problem where you have, you know, where you don't trust women and they're just out to take your money and blah, that means that you're lacking, bro. You're lacking in power. Because a true man connected to his power, those weak women will run. They are afraid. They don't want to be around that, because in order to connect with that, then they have to rise. The same is true with men. Men will run from, especially from a woman of power, because they will have to face their insecurities. But when a man is connected to his strength, his truth, his essence, which means that he does not compromise on who he is and what he wants to be, women will throw themselves at you because they want to empower that. Women are empowerers. They are beings who have the desire and the ability to empower and create. And when they see a man who's following his true essence, they want to empower him. They will ask, may I please empower you? And they will thank you if you allow them to empower you. Men don't understand this. A lot of men don't understand this. Anyway, I got on my soapbox again. Let me see. It looks like, is it psychological or energy-based? I'm not sure what the question is, but in terms of, everything is energy-based. Psychological, listen, I'm a armchair psychologist. So I do a lot of counseling. I've been to a lot of counseling. I know a lot about psychology. So I'm not trying to minimize that, but everything is energy-based. There is nothing that is not energy. Nothing. And this is something that, you know, I'm trying to teach people. I want to give people a visceral connection. Again, celestial Chi-Gong is the most powerful gift I can give anybody, which is why I'm constantly hammering it, even though I have 20-something DVDs and, you know, 20-something books. That's, if there was one thing, do that. Because when you can feel the energy and connect to it and learn how to create and manipulate energy, then you'll understand that everything is energy. Everything. And in order to connect with energy, we have to get out of our heads. Our intellect divorces us from our emotions, our emotions, energy and motion. Our emotions are energy. We are emotional beings. And when we can learn how to live in our emotions, we will learn how to let energy flow through us. So everything is energy, to answer your question. Sorry, I was just reading the questions. Is the masculine negative? It seems like there's a lot of bias on men. I don't know if that's coming from me. No, I don't. I'm a man and I love being a man. And I wouldn't want to be anything but a man. This is my preferred way of incarnating. So is there negativity? No. But it is a fact that the masculine nowadays is out of balance. And so anything out of balance causes negativity. And that's what all disease is. All disease is an imbalance of energy. And primarily an imbalance of emotional energy. And so when men become balanced, no, they're not negative at all. They're absolutely positive. Like I said, I'm proud to be a man, and I'm proud to show what a truly empowered, non-emasculated man is. So, yeah, there's a lot of bias, but, listen, there's a lot of, I won't use the word, a lot of less than powerful men in this world. So it starts, somebody's got to, show the way. So I'm sharing my understanding. I had to do a lot of healing in that area. And I'll share one last vision I had before I wrap this up. One vision I had early on, like I said, when I was going through my Taoist training, and I was really struggling to tap into the feminine within myself because I wanted to master this martial art. I mean, it came from an ego desire of wanting to be a badass and really learning, being able to kick people's ass and whatever. So to be able to do that, I had to tap into the power of the feminine and be able to put it out in my hands so that I could use it in combat. And so while this is how the universe works, it sneaks up on you. So while I'm meditating, trying to connect to my feminine, and I'm going to get emotional again, I saw, it was like I was looking, through a screen, and I saw this head pop up, and it was the head of a little girl. She popped up and then popped back down. And it was like she was afraid. And I was like, whoa. And I sort of put the feeling out, like, it's okay, come on, show yourself. And she slowly brought her head up. And I could see that she was bruised, like somebody had beat her up. And she was afraid. But she wasn't showing any, like, anger. There was this wanting to connect to me. She wanted to connect to me. And I saw in that moment that that was my own feminine side that I had been smashing down because I didn't want to appear weak. I wanted to be a tough guy. I didn't want to be weak. I grew up in an abusive relationship with my brother, and I got my ass kicked every time I showed any weakness. So that was very difficult. And when I saw that that's what I had done, that I was doing that to myself, my own power, my own Shakti, my own feminine power, I was badgering myself. It changed how I looked at the feminine. I'll share one last thing that my partner says to me. You guys know me, you've seen me. I don't think I come across as being anything other than a guy who's proud of his masculinity. But one of the things that she keeps saying to me, and she says, what is so attractive to me about you is that you're masculine, but you also are feminine. And I'm still not quite sure what that means. I don't really care. I know that it's, that's what it takes for her to love me. I'm all for it because she's the best thing I've ever found on this planet. But I think what she's doing is she's expressing that I have at least had some success at merging the masculine and the feminine. So that's what we all do. So I'm going to share with you a meditation. Again, it's in Celestial Chi-Gong. Please, if you haven't, get it. Again, it's the most powerful thing, most powerful gift I can give you. This is the cover of the DVD. And in the lower part there, I'm showing what I'm about to share with you, which is called the yin-yang hands, or the male, masculine, feminine hands. And what it is my right hand, you know, you got to keep it straight, is held here at the chest. And then my left hand is cupped at the navel. Right hand is the masculine, left hand is the feminine. And when you put them in that posture, what's happening is you are aligning the two halves of the body with the masculine and the feminine. And that's all you have to do. Do exactly what I'm doing in the picture I'm going to show you. Sit with your back straight and your head slightly tilted forward. Relax, breathe from the diaphragm. Hold that posture, close the eyes, focus on the third eye, and just breathe long and deep. Or do the Hool breath and do this posture. And maybe as time goes on, I'll share higher forms of that meditation. But that was the first thing that I learned, is that you have to learn how to balance the masculine and the feminine. You have to balance the yin and the yang. And when the yin and the yang come together, that's where you create power. And as a shaman, that's one of the things that we do, is we tap into, we absorb, we create, and use that power to not only manifest things, but also to achieve a dynamic balance. And I'll end with this. The definition of a shaman. I use the word shaman not only because that's what everybody understands when we talk about this. It's the most universally understood term, even though it's, you know, culturally incorrect. But the other reason why I use that is, as a shaman is traditionally known as someone who balances. You know, the Buddhist monk achieves enlightenment and achieves emptiness. And the Christian priest brings salvation, which are both endpoints. There's nothing beyond that. Once you've achieved that, there's no place left to go. The shaman says that's nonsense. There's always a cycle moving towards something. And that the highest state of spiritual power is one of dynamic balance. You know, where the forces of the universe are balancing. Things are always going out of balance. We're always losing our temper, or getting sad, or getting depressed, or whatever it is. We've got emotions going all over the place. That is who we are. We shouldn't hide from that. We should celebrate. And that's what the shaman does. The shaman celebrates the dynamic diversity of this universe and seeks to achieve a dynamic, harmonious, continuously changing and evolving balance. So, with that, I will, unless there's any other questions, how can we fit these concepts into the Ascension series? I don't know, you know, I don't know, I don't want to artificially shove something in there. I'll think about it and see if I can come up with that, but it's all part of the same deal. It's all connected. Anyway, that's it for now, my friends. Please be sure to check out the Patreon page, and again, I'll give you the URL for that. Patreon.com/ThunderWizard. Get Celestial Chi-Gong if you don't already have it. The most powerful gift I can. Any ladies out there, if you're wanting to understand how men work and understand how we think, I have a book called How to Keep a Man. And that's it. So that's it for now. Please continue to, again, as I said, you know, check out all of the videos. Get on the thunderwizard.com YouTube channel page and actually go in there and look at them. There are some videos on there that are priceless that people aren't watching. And the majority of the questions that people ask, I've already answered in some of these videos. I mean, it's priceless. Please make use of it. That's what it's there for. So until next time, my friends, thank you so much. May the power of the mother, the power of the feminine, be with you and empower you, and may we all achieve that dynamic balance of healing and sustenance that we can only get from our mother. Thank you.